3 granite blocks sit wedged inside the ascending passage of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Each one weighs approximately 6 tons. They are cut to fit the passage so precisely that no gap exists between the stone and the walls. They were not pushed in from the outside. The geometry makes that impossible. The passage narrows at the lower end. The blocks are wider than the opening below them. They were lowered from above, slid into position from inside the pyramid, and whoever placed them there sealed themselves in. Mainstream Egyptology explains the granite plugs as anti-robbery measures designed to prevent thieves from reaching the king's chamber. That explanation has been taught for over a century, but it cannot account for the engineering. The blocks were stored in the Grand Gallery before deployment. The deployment required workers inside the structure. Once the blocks slid into position, the ascending passage was permanently sealed. There is no room behind the plugs for a human body to pass. The workers who released them had no way back down through the main passage. The official explanation is that they escaped through the well shaft, a rough vertical tunnel connecting the Grand Gallery to the descending passage. But the well shaft is 60 meters of near-vertical unfinished rock. No rope anchors, no footholds, no lighting, and the shaft was found filled with debris when it was first explored, as though it had never been used as a functioning passage. If the plugs were not a security measure, then what were they? And if the workers did not escape through the well shaft, what happened to them? The hieroglyphs answer both questions. The answer is not what Egyptology expected. In the next several minutes, you will see what the inscriptions actually describe, what the sealing process was designed to protect, and why what was sealed inside the pyramid has never been recovered. If forbidden ancient history fascinates you, hit subscribe. Every week we decode what Egyptologists won't translate publicly. But here's what makes this stranger. The most specific description of the sealing process does not come from the Great Pyramid itself. It comes from the pyramid texts of Unas at Saqqara, carved into the burial chamber walls around 2350 BCE, and from a passage in the Coffin texts, specifically spell 1080, found on Middle Kingdom coffins dating to approximately 2000 BCE. Both texts describe a sealing sequence inside a pyramid structure using vocabulary that Egyptologists have translated as ritual language for the closing of the tomb. But the vocabulary is not ritual, it is operational. Egyptologist Raymond Faulkner, whose 1969 translation of the pyramid text remains the standard academic reference, noted that several passages in the sealing sequence use verb forms found otherwise only in engineering and construction contexts. He flagged them in his commentary as technically unusual. He did not pursue the engineering interpretation. His translation stands. The vocabulary is published. What has not happened is a reading of the sealing texts as a description of a mechanical process rather than a symbolic closing of the afterlife passage. This is not speculation. This is not a fringe reinterpretation. The pyramid texts are the most studied body of ancient Egyptian writing in existence. The grammar is standard Old Egyptian. The determinatives are cataloged and cross-referenced. What follows is what the sealing texts describe when read as engineering rather than theology. The inscription breaks into 4 stages that together describe a complete sealing and containment operation. The first stage describes preparation. The pyramid text passage uses the phrase, "The stones of closure are raised to the place of waiting." The word for stones of closure is inru setep, where inru is stone and setep means chosen or selected. The determinative attached to setep is the one used in quarry texts for stone cut to specification, not randomly selected, precision cut. The place of waiting is described using a spatial term that Faulkner translates as the upper hall. The Grand Gallery of the Great Pyramid is the only space inside the structure large enough to store 3 6-ton granite blocks before deployment. The gallery is 47 meters long and 8.5 meters tall. Its walls are corbelled, narrowing as they rise, creating a sloped channel. Notches cut into the side ramps of the gallery at regular intervals have never been satisfactorily explained by mainstream Egyptology. Engineer Jean-Pierre Houdin proposed in 2007 that the notches served as anchor points for a wooden braking system that controlled the descent of the granite plugs down the gallery and into the ascending passage. The notches are real. The dimensions match. The pyramid text describes the stones waiting in the upper hall before being released. The gallery held them. The second stage describes the release. The text reads, "The chosen stones descend by their own weight, and the path of the king is closed forever." The verb for descend uses a construction that means gravity-driven movement, the same verb form used in engineering texts to describe water flowing downhill through channels. The stones are not pushed. They fall, controlled into position. The phrase, "the path of the king is closed forever," uses a temporal marker that indicates permanent action, not temporary. This is not a door that will be reopened. pyramid. The text is explicit. The passage is sealed for all time. Mainstream Egyptology interprets forever as rhetorical emphasis common in funerary texts, but the determinative attached to forever here is not the one used in funerary contexts for eternal afterlife. It is the one used in legal texts for irrevocable contracts and in engineering texts for permanent structural features. The sealing is not symbolic, it is final. The third stage is the one that changes everything. The text describes what is inside the sealed space. The passage reads, "Beyond the stones of closure, in the chamber of the horizon, rests the instrument of the first time that must not be moved from its place until the sky returns to its beginning." The chamber of the horizon is Akhet, the known ancient name for the Great Pyramid. The instrument of the first time uses the word ket, which means device or tool, paired with zep tepi, the first time, the Egyptian term for the age of the original builders. The instrument is from a previous age. It is not a burial good. It is not a canopic jar or a golden mask. The text calls it an instrument, using the same word applied to surveying tools, astronomical sighting devices, and construction implements throughout Old Kingdom administrative records. The phrase "must not be moved from its place" uses a prohibitive construction found in legal texts governing the protection of state property. This is not a prayer, it is a containment order. The instrument stays where it is. The sealing is designed to ensure that. The phrase "until the sky returns to its beginning" is the temporal boundary. The word for sky is pet. The word for beginning is pat. The sky returning to its beginning describes an astronomical cycle, the precession of the equinoxes, the 25,920-year cycle during which the Earth's axis traces a complete circle against the background stars. The instrument is to remain sealed until one full precessional cycle is completed. The Egyptians tracked precession. The alignment of the pyramid's shafts to specific stars, Orion's belt and Sirius, demonstrates precessional awareness. The sealing is timed to an astronomical clock, and then comes the line they always skip. Coffin text, spell 1080, found on multiple Middle Kingdom coffins and translated by Adrian de Buck in his 7-volume compilation published between 1935 and 1961, contains a sentence that de Buck rendered as unclear in ritual context. The sentence reads, "The workers who sealed the path were not released. They remain with the instrument as its guardians in the stone." De Buck placed this in a footnote. He suggested it was a metaphorical reference to Shabti figures, the small servant statues placed in tombs to serve the dead. But the determinative for workers here is not the one used for Shabti. It is the determinative for living human laborers, the same sign used on payroll documents and work gang rosters. The text is not describing statues, it is describing people. The workers who sealed the ascending passage did not escape through the well shaft. They stayed inside. The sealing was not a security measure that accidentally trapped them. It was designed to include them. They are described as guardians, not victims. The grammar treats their presence as intentional. The part that shouldn't be possible is what modern scanning has confirmed. In 1993, Rudolf Gantenbrink's robot traveled up the southern shaft of the Queen's Chamber and encountered a sealed limestone door with copper fittings at 63 meters depth. In 2002, a second robot drilled through that door and found another sealed door behind it. The space between the two doors contained no passage. It was a sealed compartment. Something is between those two doors. The project was halted before the second door was opened. In 2017, the Scan Pyramids project detected the big void above the Grand Gallery using muon tomography. The void is approximately 30 meters long. Its geometry does not correspond to any structural feature in the known architectural plan. It sits directly above the space where the pyramid texts describe the chamber of the horizon. The void has been detected. It has been measured. It has not been entered. In been measured. It has not been entered. In 2023, the same project confirmed a corridor behind the chevron blocks on the north face, 9 meters long, terminating at a blank wall. 3 sealed spaces detected by modern instruments. None opened. None investigated beyond initial scanning. The pattern is consistent. Every time modern technology detects a sealed space inside the pyramid, the investigation stops at detection. The instruments confirm the space exists. The permit to enter it does not follow. The sealed doors, the void, and the corridor are all documented in peer-reviewed publications. They are not disputed. Their contents are simply unknown because no one has been authorized to look. What the museums don't mention is how long the sealing of this information has been maintained. The suppression begins in ancient Egypt itself. Around 1336 BCE, the pharaoh Akhenaten died. His successors erased his name and his theological claims from temple walls across Egypt. Among those claims was a reference to the sealed instruments of the first builders preserved in the great structures at Giza. That reference was chiseled off stone. The content was politically dangerous. It implied that the pyramids contained something more significant than a dead king. In 391 CE, a Christian mob burned the Serapeum at Alexandria. The Serapeum held the largest collection of Egyptian technical manuscripts outside the temple libraries. The librarian Callimachus had cataloged holdings under the heading "The Contents of the Sealed Houses." Those texts burned. We have only the catalog entry. Napoleon's 1798 expedition produced the Description de l'Egypte. Volume 5 contains detailed drawings of the Great Pyramid's internal passage system, including the granite plugs and the Grand Gallery. The first edition of 1809 includes notes from the expedition's engineers describing the plugs as part of a deliberate containment system rather than a robbery deterrent. Those notes were removed from the second edition of 1817. The plates were reprinted without the engineering commentary. Fewer than 30 libraries worldwide hold the first edition. Between 1837 and 1840, Colonel Howard Weiss conducted extensive forced excavations inside the pyramid. His team used gunpowder to blast through sealed passages. His field notebooks, held at the British Museum under the classification of Egyptian architectural surveys, contain observations about the well shaft that contradict the escape route theory. Weiss noted that the debris filling the shaft was packed in a manner consistent with deliberate infill, not natural accumulation. His observation was not included in his published volumes. The notebooks remain accessible only by appointment. The modern gatekeeping runs through Zahi Hawass, who controlled excavation permits from 2002 to 2011. In 2004, a structural engineering team from Waseda University in Tokyo applied to conduct a comprehensive ground-penetrating radar survey of the spaces behind and below the granite plugs. The application was denied. In 2009, an independent researcher applied to examine the space between Gantenbrink's two sealed doors using fiber optic imaging. Denied. Hawass stated publicly in 2007 that the pyramid's internal structure was fully understood. The muon data published 10 years later proved that it was not. Now here's where it gets active. In 2023, following the confirmation of the North Face corridor, the Scan Pyramids team applied for permission to insert a miniature camera into the void above the Grand Gallery. The technology is minimally invasive. A 12mm borehole through existing stone joints would allow a camera to enter the void without structural damage. As of 2024, the application remains under review. The void has been sitting above the Grand Gallery, detected, measured, and documented for 7 years. Whatever is inside it has been there for 4,500 years. The permit to look has not been granted. Now, let me be clear. I am not saying the Great Pyramid contains an ancient machine guarded by the sealed remains of its operators. The hieroglyphs are not an engineering schematic. Funerary texts contain layers of metaphor alongside practical description. Some of what the pyramid texts and coffin texts describe may reflect ritual imagination rather than physical reality. But what the sealing texts describe, when read using the determinative categories the scribes themselves assigned, is a containment operation. Precision-cut stones stored in the upper gallery, a gravity-driven release system, a permanently sealed passage, an instrument from a previous age placed inside the sealed space, workers who remained with the instrument as designated guardians. Each element uses engineering and administrative vocabulary, not spiritual vocabulary. The scribes chose those determinatives for a reason. What we have to confront is what sits inside the pyramid behind seals that have not been broken. The granite plugs are still in the ascending passage. The two sealed doors in the Queen's Chamber shaft are still closed. The void above the Grand Gallery is still unentered. The well shaft was found filled with deliberate infill, not escaped debris. The corridor behind the chevron blocks terminates at a wall that no one has been permitted to breach. And carved into the oldest religious texts in Egypt, in vocabulary that trained scholars have translated and published, is a description of what the ceiling was designed to protect and who was left inside to guard it. The pyramid is still sealed. The instrument the texts describe is either inside it or it is not. The technology to answer that question exists. The permit does not. And somewhere behind 6 tons of precision-cut granite, in a space no camera has reached since the passage was closed 4,500 years ago, whatever the builders placed in the chamber of the horizon is still exactly where they left it.